Welcome to part 2 of my Antifa Exposed series. This video will focus on how to identify Antifa terrorists and to understand the tactics used by them. While a lot of people often dismiss Antifa as a bunch of immature millennials who protest as a form of a temper tantrum, the reality is that they are a far bigger threat to our communities and our country than most people realize. As you will see in this video, Antifa are not only well-funded, but they've infiltrated and co-opted many legitimate organizations while creating their own Antifa front groups. They then use these groups to recruit, indoctrinate, and train other Antifa members to commit acts of political violence, which, by the way, under U.S. federal law, is the very definition of terrorism. With that out of the way, let's get started. In part 1 of this series, I talked about Antifa's call for action for the week around January 20th, 2019. And of course, I showed this particular website because, puppies are important for rioting. But that being said, the very first part of this, which I previously read, was, along with our comrades from It's Going Down, which, by the way, is BAM, By Any Means Necessary, a terrorist organization, Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, and The Final Straw, we are calling for a week of action around the weekend of January 20th, 2019. Now, one of the reasons this is important is because in my last Antifa Exposed video, I talked about entryism. And what's interesting is that Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is either an infiltrated group or they are an Antifa-created front group. And let's talk about that a little bit further. What is Mutual Aid Disaster Relief? Now, according to them, and I'm only going to touch on the highlights here, they're a national network of social justice activists and community organizers. We build our network through education and action. Many steering committee members have been involved in other mutual aid disaster relief projects, including Common Ground Relief and Occupy Sandy. Steering committee members educate, organize, and mobilize support around mutual aid disaster relief projects in the respective communities, regions, and networks. Our history. New Orleans, a few days after Hurricane Katrina. In spite of occasionally strong-armed attempts to evacuate the area, in spite of the white supremacist mobs hunting and killing unarmed black community members, a lot of people refused to leave the city. It's interesting. They actually talk about how these white supremacist mobs were, killing black people for sport. I never read about this in any of the news. It just, sounds like bullshit. But let's move on. People came from global justice, anti-war, anarchists, and other movements that survived state crackdown on dissent. Interesting. And I'm just going to kind of scroll down. Here we go. Many of us helped shut down Wall Street, however briefly, as part of the Occupy movement and participated in local encampments. Many of us also participated in Occupy Sandy. Mutual aid and disaster relief is a radical approach to disaster relief and social movement organizing. They also advocate for incarcerated prisoners. Okay? And again, this is their Mutual Aid Disaster Relief About section. Now, the takeaways from this are that this organization was built by long-term communist protesters. Many of the people in Occupy Wall Street, many of the people that go and do these events, many of them push communist propaganda. Now, they rebrand it as socialism, but really it's communism. Now, the other interesting takeaway is that they go into disaster zones and they use their organization to indoctrinate and recruit because disaster survivors are desperate. And because they're desperate, they're vulnerable to indoctrination. And then, of course, they admit they work to indoctrinate prison inmates. And let's take a look at their info website and kind of see what that's about. Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. They have a list of co-conspirators, accomplices and allies engaged in mutual aid and direct action for a just and sustainable future. Join us. And remember, these people are connected to Antifa. This is an Antifa front group. Even though it looks like it's just a friendly, helpful charity, that's not the reality at all. And then under the resource sections, it says, we may not be experts, but we have learned a lot so far, and we are eager to share it so that you can get into action. Now, let's talk about their co-conspirators for a second. Now, the co-conspirator list, if you look at it, it's got West Street Recovery. It's got Occupy Sandy, Common Ground Relief, Islamic Relief, United Peace Relief, Democratic Socialists of America, Black Cap Medic Collective. These are all communist organizations. These are Antifa front groups. They've either been co-opted, controlled or infiltrated by Antifa, or they've been created specifically by Antifa. And Antifa is very deep pockets, and I'll get into that in a second. Rose Hip's Medic Clinic. Beehive, here we go. Industrial Workers for the World. This is a known communist group. This is a global organization. So be aware of that. We got Seeds for Peace, Experimental Farm Network, Ruckus Society. Pay attention to that. Ruckus Society is important, and we're going to get into that later. Black Lives Matter. Sound familiar yet? These are all the usual suspects of Antifa. We're going to continue on. Black Rose Anarchist Federation. Again, Veterans for Peace, Engineers Without Borders. These people are all working with Antifa as co-conspirators, and Mutual Aid Disaster Relief actually admits it. In addition to those groups, when you go to their donate page, they talk about the Puerto Rico Rebuilds campaign. So they're basically trying to work with Puerto Ricans to indoctrinate them as well. And they're trying to get you to donate to their Amazon wish list for their groups in California, for their groups in Florida, and for North Carolina. Now, this piece is interesting because a lot of people are like, well, as long as we stay away from the cities, we're okay. Is that really true? The answer to that is no. All right. They've also got 11 separate groups in North Carolina, in addition to the Florida People's Advocacy Center and the Democratic Socialists of America's Tallahassee Hurricane Relief Fund. All right. These are all groups working with Antifa. All right. Antifa are a bunch of communist terrorists. These groups are working with them. And when I talked about being well-funded, okay, again, this is the United for Equity and Affirmative Action Legal Defense Fund. They are an affiliate of BAM. BAM is an open Antifa organization by any means necessary. These groups are funding these other groups. Kellogg Foundation, Ford Foundation, many teachers unions, Society of American Law Teachers, which are attorneys, the Southern Poverty Law Center. All these groups are funding these other groups that are here. I'll put money on it that many of these people don't even know that they've been infiltrated by Antifa. They just think that they're funding protests and trying to do their civic duty. Antifa, like I said, they formed, infiltrated, and co-opted dozens, if not hundreds, of charities, foundations, and other nonprofit organizations to indoctrinate, recruit, organize, and train and fund their terrorist efforts to overthrow the United States and institute communism. Now, like I said, most of the donors who are funding these organizations are probably unaware of their communist leanings and terroristic activities. Okay? Now, let's look at the Antifa resource page from the Mutual Aid Disaster Relief Group. All right? Now, as we scroll down, you can see, okay, we'll take a look here. Disaster response, safety and do-it-yourself cleanup, wellness and medical, trauma and burnout. Now, what's interesting about that is they have activist trauma and recovery there in black, second from the bottom. Okay. Legal insecurity, the National Lawyers Guild Know Your Rights Guide. Okay. That's that Joseph Alkoff I talked about in my last video. He worked with the National Lawyers Guild. Okay. This guy's a card carrying communist. Ruckus security culture for activists. I wonder what that is. Anti-oppression. Accomplices, not allies. I wonder what that is. Again, we're looking at kitchen and food handling, popular education and direct action, affinity groups, a handbook for direct actions. Okay. These are training materials. It's not just training materials for disaster relief. These people are prepping. They are prepping for civil war. They are prepping for guerrilla warfare. They are learning how to live using minimal resources to live off the grid for the express purpose of overthrowing our government and instituting communism. Here's some examples of their training material, all right? This document discusses how to work with organizations but not be allied with them. In other words, to use them as useful idiots and to dump them when you're done using them, all right? In addition to that, the Ruckus Society puts out a manual for scouting for activists, talks about all the different aspects of scouting and activism, scouting prep, pre-scout research, lists of questions that they should ask, examples of certain types of scouts like road blockades and things like that, scout team roles. Let me kind of make that a little bit bigger here. We'll kind of scroll up here a little bit. Examples of certain types of scouts. So you've decided to blockade a road. So they're talking about how to blockade roads, how to scout to figure out which roads to blockade. Okay. Again, this is the same type of guerrilla tactics and terrorist activities that terrorists use all over the world so that they could foment civil war. All right. Cover stories. Why are you there? Oh, I'm a hiker. I'm a jogger. I'm a lost dog owner, a bird watcher, amateur photographer, a maintenance technician, bike messenger, new intern. They're basically teaching people how to commit terrorist surveillance and scouting while not blowing their cover. On-site scouting, what you should bring with you. In addition to that, how to create scouting reports for your superiors, ways to present information, ethical considerations. Now, this is interesting because they talk about manipulating children to enter into restricted areas and how to befriend local security guards, knowing that these security guards are going to lose their jobs and those types of things. In other words, to act completely unethically and to use disinformation and manipulation in order to gain access to these locations so they can scout them for terrorist activities. In addition to that, they talk about practice makes perfect. These are examples of things Antifa can do while training in order to learn how to infiltrate these locations to get their terroristic scouting done. Now, we're going to move to the next document. Security Culture for Activists, again, by the Ruckus Society. I want you to pay attention to that. That's important, all right? This document trains Antifa how to pretend to be peaceful and avoid detection by law enforcement. All right? When you look at the document, you look at the table of contents, okay? Managing emotions. In other words, don't be a spurg. How to try to be nice and supportive and stop bad behavior. In other words, try to act non-threatening, okay? In other words, in order to manipulate people by putting up a false front. They go on about data security and then, of course, how to destroy data. In other words, how to destroy evidence of their terroristic activities, all right? Again, this was created by the Ruckus Society. Now, who is the Ruckus Society? Well, this is the Ruckus Society right here. The Ruckus Society. Actions speak louder than words. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will. Now, their mission statement, the Ruckus Society is a multiracial network of trainers dedicated to providing the necessary tools, preparation, and support to build direct action capacity for ecological justice and social change movements. God, that sounds like a lot of word salad, doesn't it? It just sounds like communist social justice bullshit. The Ruckus became a flagship organization for direct action training camps in preparation for land defense and later for major mobilizations, including the World Trade Center uprisings in 1999, the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in 2000, the International Monetary Fund World Bank mobilization in 2000, etc., throughout the anti-globalization movement and beyond. So really, what's the takeaways here? Well, first, they admit they were involved in the WTO riots. In addition to that, they were involved in the riots at the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in year 2000. They've also admitted to rioting at IMF and World Bank conferences. Basically, they're a global organization, okay? So how does Ruckus actually do this? Well, they actually tell us right here. Ruckus has trained and assisted thousands of activists. We bring activists to us at training camps and skill shares, or we go to them, community-requested tailored trainings. Through these trainings, we help people learn skills they need to practice nonviolent direct action safely and effectively. Ruckus promotes and teaches implementation of strategic nonviolent direct action against unjust institutions and policies. We all know that's bullshit. They're not nonviolent at all. These people are terrorists. Organize strategic development and coherent planning to advance campaign goals. The establishment of broad coalitions with common objectives, which we saw with the Antifa networks from the mutual aid disaster relief. Effective methods of media outreach and internet technology activism to inform the general public. A commitment to the power of diversity. Now, one of the ways they do this is through the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they get big tech to deplatform anybody who speaks out against them. I've even had Antifa videos defunded specifically because the Southern Poverty Law Center is a YouTube trusted flagger. And by the way, they also fund BAM, the Antifa terrorist organization. So it's a clear conflict of interest here. YouTube should not be working with any organization that funds terrorism. In addition to hosting trainings, now this is important. In addition to hosting trainings, Ruckus also provides action support at a wide variety of levels. From helping you brainstorm action ideas to pulling off an action for you for groups who desire assistance with their action campaign. So, what are the takeaways here? Well, first and foremost, they've trained thousands of Antifa and anarchist terrorists. Secondly, they're a domestic Antifa training camp. Third, they help with all aspects of Antifa terrorism from training to active participation. They're like the Antifa Special Forces mercenaries. You can hire these people to train and to help your Antifa group be more effective at whatever it is you want to do. And if your people can't do it themselves, these people will step in and they'll commit terrorist acts in your name. Now, how do you identify Antifa? Well, according to policemag.com, to effectively identify criminal Antifa members among authentic protesters and demonstrators, officers need to know their common traits and physical identifiers. A common symbol utilized by Antifa is the anarchy A, which is composed of a capital letter A within a circle. Officers may see this image in the form of graffiti, but more often as a body tattoo. Another common Antifa tattoo consists of the letters ACAB, which stands for All Cops Are Bastards. The black flag of anarchy also advertises the presence of criminal-minded Antifa members. The flag may appear as solid black or as a red and black divided rectangle. It is often hoisted in the air on flag sticks amid protesting crowds. The more dangerous Antifa rioters can assault police and security forces, then easily blend back into the mob and disappear. Criminal Antifa sects normally attempt to commingle in genuine protest demonstrations and are known to wear their black bloc monochromatic uniform underneath outer clothes so as not to immediately stand out in the crowd. Officers should scan for backpacks, which may conceal containers of broken glass, acid-filled projectiles for throwing, or cans of spray paint for vandalism. Antifa is also known to pre-stage hidden caches of improvised weapons in the area of a planned protest or demonstration to be easily accessible by their riotous members. These everyday items used as weapons often include vehicle lug nuts, golf balls, hammers, broken glasses, and smileys, which are bandanas looped through padlocks and violently swung at enemies. The types of demonstrations most commonly attended by Antifa groups include those against environmentally harmful practices, those against gentrification, anti-police rallies, right-wing political events, and most recently those contesting the removal of Confederate war monuments. When you must deal with Antifa, a few key focal points are crucial. First, know that you will be recorded. Antifa members most often surreptitiously video and audio record their interactions with police forces in an effort to capture some demonizing interchange or illegal commands by an officer. When speaking with any criminal-minded anarchist Antifa adherent, always assume that you are being recorded and know that even your most benign statement may be edited and manipulated against you. The more tactically minded Antifa will often bait officers into making emotionally charged statements with confrontational and cantankerous interactions that they will capture on video. So, what are the takeaways here? Well, first and foremost, Antifa will often pre-cache weapons and supplies near their protest sites. Secondly, they often wear black bloc under their clothing and they commingle with protest groups, which we've seen already. I mean, this is common knowledge at this point. They often carry backpacks to conceal improvised bombs, projectiles, and other weapons. And fourth, Antifa are prone to use seemingly non-threatening items as improvised weapons. And then finally, they record these events to control the narrative. And my guess is that they probably also use them as training tools as well. Now, I'm providing this information as a public service. So if you or someone you know works, goes to school, or happens to be in an area targeted by Antifa for rioting, then hopefully you can use this information to keep yourself and your loved ones safe from their terrorism. As you can see, Antifa are not training activists or protesters. They're training guerrillas and soldiers. In much the same way, the United States Special Forces trains freedom fighters in countries run by oppressive regimes. They do this all over the world. They're well organized, well funded, and global in reach. Their goal? To overthrow the United States and to institute communism. These are not only crimes, they're treasonous. And if our government doesn't step in to identify, arrest, and charge these people with terrorism soon, our country risks descending into civil war, and many innocents will die. I'm DDJ, and this has been your dose of misandry today.